Good evening, everybody. I'm Lori Pond, advisor to Pasadena Photography Arts, and I'm here with Erica Martin, another advisor, and we are the hosts of OpenShow tonight. Thank you for joining us. Erica and I are coming to you live from the Mahi Mahi room in downtown Encino. Just kidding. We're on a computer like you guys, so I just thought I'd embellish that a little bit. This open show is sponsored by Pasadena Photography Arts, which is a project of the nonprofit Fulcrum Arts.
At Pasadena Photography Arts, we are promoting emerging and established photographers and helping them exhibit their works. And we sponsor OpenShow Pasadena and educational programs such as Forum. And we try to present these monthly. Currently, we're here coming to you on Zoom. With virtual programs like these, we are working to make it possible for photographers to reach audiences worldwide. If you or anybody you know would like to present at future open shows, the link is in the chat. And if you follow the link, you'll find out more about how to submit. And you can follow us and like us on Facebook and Instagram. As we're primarily a volunteer organization, and so Pasadena Photography Arts works hard to keep our costs to a minimum, but there are some expenses involved. So we ask that you donate whatever you can by visiting our website, pasadenaphotographyarts.org, and clicking on the button. We welcome your donations, and we also want your feedback. If you have comments or suggestions, email us at the address in our chat. And
another way you can support our programming is to visit our print shop and collect work. There will be a link in the chat for that as well to the print shop. And tonight's featured work is on the slide in front of you, and that's a PPA advisor and founder, Bill Wishner. Tonight's event has been made possible through a generous donation from photographer Susan Gans, and this is the second time she's underwritten a program of ours, so we're very appreciative. Thank you so much. A great way to help out PPA is by underwriting an event like this, so email us to find out how. The email will also be in the chat.
And during tonight's event, everyone has the opportunity to type questions and comments into the chat whenever you like, and we'll try to get to as many comments as possible we have an intimate group, so we ought to be able to get to all of your questions. The event's being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel, which will also, I think, be in the chat. And now, on to the main event.
So we're going to start with photographer Jo Ann Chaus. Jo Ann Chaus is an American artist based in New York City. She photographs herself and explores the emotional state of mind of the characters she portrays in her self-portraits as a stand-in for any woman. Her work draws from her lived experiences as a woman, wife, and mother. She takes inspiration from her conscious and subconscious memories and imprints from her past, her role models, the media, the women's movement, and the raising of daughters, all while she continues to raise herself. She has received national and international recognitions and awards, including the Critical Mass Top 50 Award in 2022 and Critical Mass finalist from 2018 all the way through 2021. She self-published a 7-year project about her family of origin, Sweetie and Handsome, in 2016. Her early influences include Larry Sultan, William Eggleston, Stephen Shore, and Dorothea Lange. So Jo Ann, let's see your project.
Thank you, Lori, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Pasadena. Thank you, Doug and Debbie. What I'm going to do is, as the slideshow runs through, I'm just going to read a brief statement because I think, Lori, you pretty much covered everything in the intro. But and then as we go through the work, I'll add additional comments. So In my previous body of work, Conversations with Myself, I confronted myself directly in the images, channeling my past and subconscious of the 1950s housewife syndrome that was embedded in me. That costume project lasted for about 7 years. And at a certain point, I couldn't dress up anymore. I had to be who I was as I am. I released myself from those mid-century expectations of female roles. And so the new work is just that. It's me as a stand-in for any woman, as Lori said, navigating my day-to-day adventures at this point in my life. So, let's see. I had a conversation with Lori and she brought up a few points that I'll cover. And I guess if anybody has questions about any of the individual images, I guess we can discuss that too. But Lori brought up the point, I don't know if anybody follows Jerry Saltz on Instagram. He's the New York Magazine art critic. And she brought up this point. It was a quote of his, and it said, "Art is a way to give consciousness spatial form and dramaturgical structure." I had to look up dramaturgical, and what it means is it's a dramatic composition and theatrical representation. So in my work, I am dramatizing, and they are exaggerations and perhaps caricatures. Lori had also asked me who is having this conversation, since the first body of work was called Conversations with Myself, and this body of work is called The Conversation Continues. Well, as you can see in this work, the images are more suggestive. They're hints and traces. There are a few that are directly confrontational and full face, but most of the images are not full face and confrontational. Who is having the conversation? Well, you could say that it's a combination of myself as I am with earlier selves, myself with the voices in my head that are expectations of what I should be doing or what I actually want to do. And it would be my conscious thoughts and my subconscious selves. Lori had also mentioned about my color palette, and as she mentioned, my early influences were Eggleston and Shore and Saul Leiter, for any of you who know him, with the saturated 1950s chromes. I mean, I was born in 54. For whatever reason, I just have this really strong attachment to that time period, that decade, and the decade that followed, I suppose. Talking about lighting, basically what I do is follow the light. I look for the light and find something to put in it. Usually it's myself or something, or just follow that light and grab my camera. And I take pictures everywhere and anywhere, and I take pictures every day, pretty much. If I don't take pictures, something doesn't feel right within me. She also asked something about mirrors, that there seems to be a big reference to mirrors. And I looked this up because it wasn't necessarily something that was so conscious, but what I found on the internet was, from a psychological sense, mirrors symbolize the threshold between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, which was like, well, that's pretty much what I do. I rely on my instincts. Many times my images are not planned out. They are a series of play. I've been away many times with my friend JP Terlizzi, who's here, and we just play and react and respond to the environment, the houses, the light, and make images that are pulling from deep within and are saying something about things that you can't really even articulate. I mean, most of us know that's kind of what we do. I make images, I make work, I respond to my environment, and then I figure out afterwards, what is this work saying? I think they said, like, your subconscious mind is way faster than your conscious mind. Lori had also asked me, she said, a lot of your work seems to be nostalgic. Do I want the viewer to go backwards with me? Well, I come from a family of collectors, not necessarily hoarders, but collectors. And I definitely inherited this sense of attachment and nostalgia to things from the past, objects that many, many hands have touched over the years, generations before. And it's the thread of time. And yes, that's what I have to say as a prepared statement.
You know, when you and I were talking, I asked you about a specific image, and that was the one with the miniature people and in a semicircle inside of that octagonal
Right.
box. And I was wondering, who is in the mirror in that box, and what does she represent? It's very obscure looking in there.
Well, obviously, it's a reflection of myself. And it's me with all those little characters. It's me looking at all the different versions of myself, or all the different versions of any women that any of us could have been. Yeah.
Oh, great, great.
Does that answer you
Yeah,
sufficiently?
yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it's an antique powder puff thing. So it's like a combination of all the women or the woman. I did not know who it belonged to. I bought an antique shop who had treasured and used this thing to adorn herself, which is, what as women we do, men also. I mean, we adorn ourselves, we do our hair, we, do makeup, whatever it is that we do. And it's just, that's the thread. It's always happened. In Cleopatra's time, they wore all kinds of kohl and eyeliner, and everybody's always adorning themselves. So, we put our masks on for others or for ourselves. And in some of this work, I'm trying to take my mask off a little bit and be as I am. I don't think I can quite get away with it 100%.
Boy, you answered all of my questions. They were so great. The answers. A lot of your photographs that you have the dramatic diagonal lighting coming into the scene remind me so much of Edward Hopper.
Oh yeah, totally. I
Especially
didn't
the one
mention
of
him as
you
an
in the
influence.
diner.
Yeah, that one definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I just really like dramatic light, obviously. But that's very Hopper-esque. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We have a question in the chat from Claudia Cunin, and she asks, since all these photos are self-portraits, how do you shoot them?
When I first started making this project, doing self-portrait, let me say one thing. I never took pictures of people. When I started doing photography about 20 years ago, I never did pictures of people. I shot empty spaces, fire hydrants, phone booths, whatever. And I really wanted to make pictures. A friend of mine said, your spaces are so beautiful. Why isn't there somebody in them? So I started making pictures of my parents in that book that ended up being that Sweet and Handsome book. And then we were going to be moving, and I needed to get rid of a lot of stuff. And I decided to photograph myself wearing everything. I wore leaves, I wore stickers, I wore everything that I had to get rid of. I wore my kids' clothes, their costumes. And I did all this in a studio. I had a studio in my old house. And I showed this work to somebody, and they said, these are great, but they look like sketches. Like, why don't you take this on the road someplace? And so I did. A friend of JP and I had gone to this workshop up in Maine, and it was called The Personal Story. And what I realized was that I transported myself in every costume that I put on and every place I was in as if I were someone else in that spot. So in order to answer the question, what I do is I'll set something up, a light stand or something in the exact spot where I know that I want to stand, and focus on it, take the autofocus off, and go back and forth pretty much. I don't shoot tethered. It's funny. I would be funny to watch me. I go back and forth to the back of my camera because it's digital, to make sure, see if my gesture is right, if I'm standing in the right place, or if I should be turned this way or that.
We have another question
Okay.
from Debbie Arlook.
Yeah.
And she says, some of the work feels different visually and tone-wise. Is that new work or older work? Can you talk about the differences? And she says, I'm a big fan.
Yes, Debbie. This work. So what happened was I was making this 1950s costumed work, and I had questions that I was asking in relation to my relationship with my mother, and what it was like to be a woman in the 1950s, and how tethered I was to that state of mind. And I got to a certain point where I just couldn't make any of that work anymore. It was as if, I was either repeating myself or, there was no instinct left here. So I also did a lot of that work, had a very dark sense to it. And I wanted the work to go kind of lighter, not so heavy and serious. And so yes, Debbie, I did. I started making other work that was lighter, that was as I was lighter and feeling lighter. And so this work, which I'm calling The Conversation Continues, is maybe a little bit more existential, more of a hint, a suggestion of, what of life. It's up to interpretation to anyone, everyone, the viewer.
That's what I really like about your work, is that it is so interchangeable and you can put yourself inside of the characters of the images. It's very easy to put myself in the place of that woman sitting at the diner.
I mean, that is so fabulous. Yeah. I appreciate that so much. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions for Jo Ann and her fantastic work?
Thank you, Lori. Let's see. What does Doug say?
Oh, here's one from Jackie Rupp.
Mhm.
She says, love your work. Notice you are showing much less of yourself, more suggestive, maybe more universal. Still natural light. Love the strength in the lighting.
Yes, still natural light. More suggestive. I'm sorry, what was the question?
She said you're showing much less of yourself, more suggestive. And she says maybe that's more universal.
I think it just got to a point where I didn't feel like I needed to, I used the word confrontational a few times already, but I felt as though I just didn't need to confront myself anymore. Then I just wanted to be with myself. I just wanted to experience whatever I was experiencing. And the other work, I was really looking at some hard questions and looking so hard for those answers. And it was very intense and a very intense time period. I mean, this one is like me having a conversation with my younger self. I don't know if this is the best image, but I love the swing of her skirt.
Yeah, yeah. It's really
I mean,
nice.
I should also say that, like, I do have a background. I was in retail for many years in women's apparel. So, and I come from a very colorful home and background, and my whole family is nobody's trained in anything, but everybody's very creative and artistic.
I believe it. Well, if nobody has any other questions, thank you very much, Jo Ann, for your presentation. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And now we're going on to Philip Ringler. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I just said that. Philip Ringler and his his presentation is called This Exhibit is Closed, which already makes me laugh. There's so much humor in this work, you'll see. But let me tell you a little bit about him. Philip Ringler has been making photographs professionally since he was 19. He has photographed musicians and also worked as a commercial photographer, published in the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and Art in America, to name a few. He received his Bachelor of Fine Arts at California State University, East Bay, and earned a Master of Fine Arts from John F. Kennedy University's Arts and Consciousness program. His studies in art theory, East Asian philosophy, and art, along with living and traveling in China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, have informed much of his work in the past 10 years. Philip's artwork is in private collections, galleries, and museums all over the world. He mainly exhibits internationally, especially in Europe and Asia. He currently lives in Orlando, Florida, with his partner Anna and cats Penny, who's a calico, and Carl, who's a cow again. Okay. Philip, you might want to explain that last one, but later.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, they call them tuxedo cats sometimes because they're black and white, but I like cow. It's a little more descriptive. Jo Ann, your work's so amazing. That was so cool. I really got some great insight into your work. That was wonderful. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love doing these kind of things and talking about this work. You know, it's what keeps me up at night. It's what I think about. And this project, I'm so happy to finally have released the entirety of this project in book form, which is really the format for this work that it was intended. So a lot of the pictures that we're looking at here, they do sometimes function with their counterpart, and you get an idea. Some of them, I like to keep each image should be self-realized on its own terms, but there's a relational nature to this series that is also important. And the way to find out about that is to buy my book. So you can do that after the thing. But yeah, this work was shot over a 10-year period, starting in 2013, when I was first invited to China by a friend of mine, a conceptual photographer named Leo Pan, invited me over to have some shows in Guangzhou and to give some lectures at a couple of different universities. And I was so welcome. I felt so welcome and so engaged in the Chinese culture, and people seem to be so eager to learn about the creative process that I decided to move there in 2015. So the other work is when I was living there and traveling around the different cities in China in 2015, 2016, 2017. So yeah, this series, when I first got off the plane in China, I thought I was going to be shooting black and white images because I had been doing a lot of that previously, and the colors were so striking that I absolutely had to start shooting color. And I became obsessed with this particular kind of blue. I refer to it as huckleberry hound blue, which is this weird color that I just became really obsessed with finding it in different forms. And one of the forms that I would find it in is these simulated icebergs at these enclosures in amusement parks. And I have been, there's the examples right there. I had been photographing amusement parks and zoos and aquariums really since I started as a teenager. This is the first place my dad ever took me to take a picture, and he would point out, you know, that the horns on this one animal looks like a stick over here. And he really taught me to start seeing and looking for graphics around and looking for ways of composing images. And then that led me to photographers like Gary Winogrand, Elliot Erwitt, and ultimately to Dwayne Michaels, who who really changed my life. So, this work, it's motivated by understanding my relationship to photography and photography's relationship to reality. What is the consensus reality and what is photographic reality? So I do end up taking a lot of pictures of pictures. I'm interested in things that are being intentionally sort of representative of something else in order to sort of confound the viewer and create that suspension of disbelief that even though you can see the artifice, there's a certain believability that you're in another realm, you're in something. And when you photograph that, you can actually sort of design, I like to design the paradox within each image or within a series of images. So it's an exploration of not only my personal philosophy coming out of a sort of Buddhist perspective and coming out of photojournalism, where I decided at one point that my personality was coming out so much in my photojournalistic work that I decided I'm just gonna like become an artist so I can go full tilt the other way. And I don't have to be descriptive anymore. I can be as esoteric and philosophical as I want. So yeah, that's sort of in a nutshell what this series is kind of about.
Your pictures have both an incredible beauty and almost like a cruelty built into them. Evidenced especially by the enclosure with the polar bear in the cage and in that glass enclosure, and the image with the drain and the bars. You just see cruelty there. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. So from the beginning, when I'm making this work, there's an absolute attraction and repulsion at the same time happening. So I'm feeling attracted to the like infrastructure of the zoo as a like theatrical set or the aquarium or whatever. And I'm also being, there's an ethical consideration that I have too when I'm doing this kind of work where, I really don't like zoos for what they're intended for. I don't like aquariums for what they're intended for. But I can go to these places and I can do a kind of I call it like a psychological scavenger hunt, where I can find the work that I need within these things and they inform what I want. But the actuality of what's happening there, it definitely, it informs the image too. So there's the sort of sublime nature of horrific prison for animals, as well as like a metaphor for human suffering and the illusion of imprisonment. So there are these two sort of paradoxical things that are held up there. And I'll say that when I've been doing this for so long, and I've gone to zoos and aquariums all over the world. I don't just like go in and do this work. I also report animal abuse to PETA. Like as soon as I got home, I sent that polar bear picture and a couple more to PETA International, because that polar bear it's in a horrible living situation in a mall underneath Guangzhou, and it's just, but the image itself becomes so powerful as a metaphor for this. Like you see the polar bear, it looks like it's split in half, right? And for me, even though that's the only image of an animal actually that I have in this entire book, but it's the only image I need because it's so it could summarize the whole series on its own, because it is about that here and there, that presence and dissipation of presence. And but in order to lighten it up, I have to show you like the way so I pair it with this other image on the other side. So I don't know if you can see that. So yeah, these two images, the polar bear and the picture of the legs where they're on the glass. One is a little more humorous and the other one is a little more dark. And I want to do that to sort of diffuse the tension of the captured polar bear and have the reflection or the shadow of this fish underneath this one, which is, you know, for me, it's like sort of very Gary Winogrand silliness. But, you know, I do want to contain different levels of meaning and tone in one image. Like this one, for example, with the snake and this bench, like for me, it's kind of silly and ridiculous in some ways because I like to imagine that this snake just, you know, reached out and just devoured who was ever on this bench. And you have the like remnants of blood and carnage kind of on this bench. And that's sort of like hilarious for me because it's the image that did this. But you know, when I pair it up with this other thing where there's a person without a head, to have that kind of photograph and anti-photograph conversation that I learned from Elliot Irwin.
Mhm. We're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you if you wanted to comment on the Jerry Saltz quote.
Oh my God. First of all, I love Jerry Saltz with all my heart. He's why aren't all art critics as cool as
I
Jerry
don't know, but
Oh
let
my
me give you the quote again, just so in case somebody hasn't seen it the first time. Art is a way of giving consciousness spatial form and dramaturgical structure.
when I first heard that, I was so happy to hear him say that because that's really exactly what I'm trying to do here. You know, this idea of consciousness, our individual consciousness, the collective consciousness, a cultural consciousness, how to give those form, how to contain those things into a single image. And I think honestly, photography is one of the best mediums for that. It does it really successfully. So, you know, maybe that and music are the two ones that I think can sort of do that the best. But you know, to have that dramaturgical structure, they're talking about the human condition, or you know what it means to be in you know like sort of a Shakespearean idea of this is everything is a theater, we're merely the players, and it's that realization of you know it's encapsulating that whole quote and putting it into one image or two images, whatever it takes to get that idea across. I think he's absolutely spot on. Sometimes I don't agree with him though, but this time I was like, oh my God, that's perfect.
Yeah,
You are
yeah, it's
a
just a
genius.
brilliant quote. I have a comment from one of the people in the audience, Claudia Cunin. She says, amazing that the images can be playful and depressing at the same time. It's something that you talked
Thank you.
about. I think that's a really good thing. It's a compliment.
I like it.
Um,
Thank you.
So Philip, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. It was really, really fun, and I admire your perspicacity in going to PETA with these images. I'm personally very impressed by that, and thank you for doing that.
Absolutely.
And thank you for sharing your work once again.
Thank you for having me. I miss California, so thank you.
Oh, okay.
So next up is Nanci Milton Fitterman, and the series Her Not Her. Nanci's a photographer and writer. She resides in the Puget Sound area of Washington State. She grew up in South Dakota and spending summers in Taos, surrounded by artists, writers, and educators, and has been using photography as a mode of expression since an early age. Her work employs images, assemblage, and installation pieces, utilizing text and images. She explores themes of memory and memoir, loss and decay, myth and truth. Nanci mixes poetry, mysterious diptychs and triptychs, drawing on images and video, and moving across digital, analog, and alternative processes, as well as experimental ideas to enhance her narrative. Nanci is currently part of a juried group exhibit at A. Smith Gallery in Texas, Common Objects, and her portfolio is on allaboutphoto.com. Take it away, Nanci. You're muted, Nanci.
There you go.
There we go. Okay.
Excellent.
So again, thank you so much, Erica, for those lovely words, that lovely introduction. Thank you additionally, of course, to Pasadena Photography Arts for such a great opportunity and for the mission that they're on. Much applause for that. And thank you for everyone who is here tonight. The work I'm sharing tonight is a very personal project. And I'm going to start with just some words and phrases, and then kind of circle back and delve into them a little more in detail. As I said, it is an homage to kind of a search for and collaboration really with my mother, who passed away of dementia about 15 years ago after many years of suffering from it at some level. And the last 6 months were a very condensed experience between us as I went back and cared for her in the care home pretty intensely. Some words and thoughts, transience and impermanence come to mind, memory, loss of memory, loss in general, reshaping and navigating a new course, bearing witness, folding, observation, the haze of memory, and trying to penetrate that haze and go into it, and compression. So the title, Her Not Her, very much expresses this sense of transience and impermanence that I felt at that time. And knowing that nothing is permanent, and yet nothing that is created is ever destroyed. It's really simply remade, restructured, and sent out in a different form. Matter is never destroyed. So there's hope in that, while you are suffering with the person and suffering yourself. And then memory, of course, is that loss for her of memories, and yet that potential loss for me of the memory of her as she became this other thing in a way. And then reshaping and navigating. And I found during the time that it became necessary to, as we kind of walked down this corridor that only had one end to it, this need to reshape what our memories were going to be, how I was going to think of her, and how she was going to be, and reshaping how we dealt with each other. The mother was now the daughter, and the daughter was now the mother, and how did that taint or at least tinge the former memories. So that was something I was trying to deal with in this project as well. And then bearing witness. I actually didn't take very many photos during that time. They were just some black and white 35mm shots, because it was like you had to look, but it was difficult to look. but you had to look. And so I tried to kind of take a distance, but I now will.
Oh dear.
She just disappeared.
Did we lose her?
I think we might have lost her.
She did not know that.
Well, our support team is working hard on getting Nanci back. In the meantime, I think if anybody has any comments they'd like to make or about any of the work that you've seen so far today, we can circle back, and Philip and Jo Ann would be more than happy to answer any additional questions that you might have, or if you guys want to add something. Or we can just sit here and wait until
Well,
hear
so
from. Oh, do we know the status of the?
um, no status update.
I just
Okay.
emailed her, but
So I would suggest maybe we can go to Natalie and then finish Nanci when she rejoins us.
Yeah, that's what we'll do.
Okay. Stay
Okay.
tuned. Um, let's see. All right. So Natalie, you're coming on early.
all right. Well, we'll pivot right here for the minute. So Natalie Behring, Natalie grew up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and then left for a varied and exciting career around the world as a photojournalist. She worked at Reuters in China and worked on the transition in Hong Kong. She's photographed disasters, wars, celebrities, presidents, the Olympics, concerts, and many other topics. And she's also a photo editor. Her clients have included Nike, Getty, Greenpeace, Newsweek, the New York Times, Discovery Channel, Bloomberg, amongst others. And she had recently work was featured in the Washington Post. So Natalie moved back to home, to the area of her childhood, to take care of her father and family farm. And in this series, Mild Winter, she's pivoted to quiet and more subtle work depicting the snowed-in landscape in which she finds herself surrounded. And I find the work to be both lyrical and lovely. And however, coming from Southern California, I find the term mild winter to be either ironic or perhaps sarcastic. But I understand that it actually perhaps is mild by Idaho, Wyoming standards. So Natalie, take it away.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Pasadena Photography Arts, and all the photographers here tonight. I feel so honored to be showing my work with you. Your work is amazing, and like Erica said, I'm a photojournalist, so mostly I'm just taking photos for newspapers and magazines, and some blogs or something. So this is kind of my first project that is not hardcore photojournalism or like a really hard news topic. So I moved during COVID. I mean, I grew up here and I hated it as a teenager. It was really difficult for me and my family growing up in a super conservative place. We're not that conservative. And as soon as I turned 18, I just got as far away. I went to China. I got as far away as I could. And then during COVID, my dad's a farmer in this area. And during COVID, I was super worried about him. He's in his 90s. So I thought, well, I'll just go see if I can help him. And surprisingly, I had a wonderful time here. I just drove around. I have like a big 500 millimeter lens, and I drove around Yellowstone, and Grand Teton Park taking pictures of animals. And I thought, well, maybe I should just move back for a little while. So along came the first winter, and my dad isn't here in the winter. He goes to Arizona, and I didn't really know anyone. I don't have a neighbor for about a mile. So I'm pretty isolated, and I mean, I'm an introvert, so that's okay. But like Jo Ann said, like if I don't take photos, I wake up hungry for photos. So I just had to entertain myself or like satisfy my photography vitamin requirement. So I would just get in my car and started driving around, and I didn't know what I was doing. It was just more like I was like a robot, just combing the landscape, looking for something to photograph. And I just ended up taking these like snowscapes or like really snowy photos. And I thought they were pretty. And, I maybe would put one or two on Instagram, and, I might get an assignment, and then another week would go by and I would have to take more photos and I just felt restless. So I've been working on this for 2 years now. So the first year I mostly was just using longer lenses, and I didn't realize it was a project. I didn't think of it as a project. I was just going out to make a nice photo with no place for it. So after the first year, I thought, well, I maybe had like 12 or 15 photos. And I thought, well, these kind of look good together. So maybe I can turn this into a bigger project. And the next year, this past winter, it was a crazy winter, which I think people all over United States, especially in California, probably they had it way worse than we did, but we had a very cold, very long, very snowy winter. And this is the first winter of my life I loved because I had a purpose. I could go out every day and take photos. And this year, I started taking a lot more color photos. I got I don't know how to say it, but a Godox or Godot, like a handheld, really powerful flash. And I just thought it was such a contrast with some of the photos that are so stark and spare and black and white and just really empty almost of everything, just to have like a blast of color. And I thought it kind of looks almost funny next to the black and white photos. So yeah, so I started taking a lot of color and turning winter into all the different colors. And yeah, and I'm just gonna keep going. Maybe I'm thinking I might try and do a book one day. I'm not sure, but a lot of the reason this is called mild winter is because all the locals here, especially the older people, and even myself, like as a child, winters were bonkers. Like there was so much snow. And in the past 20 years, it's just been less and less snow and not as cold or not cold for so long. So climate change is coming. Like it is here. And I think since it's welcome, people don't like being like minus 30 degrees. So it feels good when it's only like -5. So all the older people, they talk about how winters used to be so much crazier. And I took a portrait of a Sioux woman who lives in Ethity, which is the Wind River Reservation. She told me a story about a really hard winter that her grandpa told her about, where there was so much snow that people had to climb out of their teepees from the center pole, and the hunters went out into the snow and found bison from blowholes in the snow. And which I don't know if that's true, but why not? And my neighbor next door told me he remembers he grew up in, well, the house down the street from me. He grew up in that house. He was born and grew up in that house. He's probably like 70, 75. He told me he remembers snow being all the way up to the telephone poles, the tops of the telephone poles, which cannot be true. It cannot be. Maybe it drifted like in little valleys or something. And in the village where I live, it's called Victor, Idaho. They used to have to dig tunnels between the shops. so that someone could get from one shop to the next. Anyway, there are lots of stories about how winter used to be so intense, and I'm thinking I'd like to pair some of the photos with some of those little stories about how how when the winters weren't so mild. And one of the other things that Erica and I spoke about the other day was some of I don't know if they're influences, but the photography that I love. And I look at a ton of photo books. I look at them online, I look at them in real life. But at the moment, I really like a photographer named John Taggart. He just breaks all the rules. I don't really want my photos to look like him, but as a photojournalist, I've found it's really hard to kind of just to break rules. I struggle with that, like just to take photos that are badly exposed or not properly exposed or not properly composed or just something more strange. So I love looking at work that is like wrong focused or has strange composures or exposures. So, and I also love Will Matsuda in Portland and Laura Webb Nichols, who is a photographer who was a pioneer in Wyoming. And yeah, that's my work. So thank you so much for including me.
So, Natalie, much of your previous work and looking on your website and things involves action or storytelling moments. And I'm wondering, like, how you felt about these more sort of mysterious and contemplative images, some of which are sort of not about anything, more about a mood or a feeling.
I really like the idea of underthinking things. So, oh, those are 5 cows, by the way. That might be kind of hard to see, but that's what they are. I think like, I feel like I've never really had a photographic style. Like I can't look at many of my photos and say, oh, that's a classic Natalie photo. So, you know, it's changed over time. And also I feel like as a journalist that I haven't really developed that part of my photographic personality for whatever reason. So, so these photos are just kind of, I didn't do them. They're not for anything. They're just, I just would see something. I just was completely free just to take that, whatever photo I thought meant something to me, whether it was something funny or something like I liked the color or just something, even like a private idea. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was thinking also, like, do you think you maybe see this landscape with new eyes, like after all your worldwide travels, then you come back to this place of your childhood that, you know, a lot of us, the place we know or grew up, it's hard to see things. And when you go to like a foreign country, you see things with new eyes and you're inspired to take photos. But do you think you had sort of the opposite experience, like coming from, you know, exotic places and then coming back to Idaho and Wyoming? And did that?
Yeah, I do. I do think I certainly did not think that this was a beautiful place when I was a teenager. So yeah. But I also, yeah, I think that maybe that's where the simple photos, they're not all simple, but the ones that are, I feel like those kind of speak to how I think of this place. It's like it's very still and very stark and very simple. And that's at least what I'm trying to, what I see when I'm out taking photos for some of these photos.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie. We have a couple of comments here. Claudia Kunin said, perfect sense of composition, well done. And Krishna Malhotra said, beautiful blend of photojournalistic work and a deep aesthetic sense.
Thank
And
you so much.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Yay.
All right, I'm looking forward to the rest of Nancy's.
Well, she's back,
All
it
right.
turns out. So we're going to rejoin Nancy's presentation.
Okay, hello everyone again. I am so sorry, power issues intervened for a moment, but we're back. So yeah, this as I was saying, there was a sense of almost clinical observation and putting her under a forensic lens. And then those photos got put away for a long time, until very, very recently, really. During COVID, a lot of boxes from moving ended up having time to get opened up again. And there I found these few photographs of that time. And it made me start thinking about, because I was looking at them in a different way now, and it began to make me think about, how do I shape her memory? How do I make a narrative of some sort for myself, but honoring that the difficulty of that time and that experience, and somehow weaving it into her past memories. Because I also discovered a whole group of photographs of my dad's, black and white photographs, as well as color slides. And my mother for him was like his ultimate dream model. And that was a very idyllic time for me in my memory of them and of her. And so I wanted to kind of compare and contrast those and knit those together in some kind of a way to penetrate through the haze of memory and bring it forward into whatever concept or configuration it had now. And I also wanted to make it more physical or more tactile. So the folding aspect came in, almost making sculptural collages of images that were in the project already. So taking them kind of to another step or another level or a different realm, putting other objects like the glass piece here, which also is kind of that barrier between the now and the past. And you can see through it enough to kind of pull through and perceive the memory. And folding also had a sense to me of that time when I looked back, that death was kind of folding her in a way, ever so gradually, getting more condensed and more compressed all the time, and into these iconic images here, sort of emblematic, like the one that's on the screen now, of kind of crystallized just sensations of memory and of the body and the person. And so that's the project. I'll just leave with a quote that means a lot to me in my process and my work overall, but I think especially speaks to this. It's from James Elkin's books, The Object Stares Back, where he says, "Seeing alters the thing that is seen and transforms the seer." And that's what I strive for in my work, and especially in this project. Some of my influences overall, but especially for this project, would be Diane Arbus and her confrontational work, Sophie Calle in her investigation of herself and her relationships, Christian Boltanski also in his looking at and putting extensive long narratives of his background and history and experience. And cinematically, Andrei Tarkovsky comes to mind, and even musicians and composers such as Mahler and Nick Cave. So those things float through my mind all the time. thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming back to it and allowing me to finish.
So, Nancy, its process becomes like a big entity in this work, particularly since you're working with these limited series of photographs, and the way that you've like reused photographs and altered them. What processes are you using to draw and or enhance your images? And have you started with any alternative processes to get to where you are?
I actually have not. That is something I would really like to do in the future with them, is taking them into another level. Primarily right now I'm doing just some post-production filtering in the computer, very, very basic. I'm not a Photoshop person. So although I admire work done with it, it's not for me. It's almost too refined. So it's just basic filtering and then drawing either directly on the image or again post-production in a computer using a Wacom tablet to add the text. So it's pretty crude and raw, but in a way I think that speaks to the concept of it, is keeping it kind of imperfect.
And I noticed one of your images, just to interject here, it looks like a wet plate collodion image. The one you were speaking about that was on the screen.
This one here?
No,
Or
not that one.
no.
It's a branches.
Oh, right. Yes, the iconic ones. Those are right. Those are actually another thing I utilize as well is my very simple, very basic desktop scanner. So these are kind of, I guess, what you would call scanography in a way. And then, but you're definitely picking up the direction I wanted to go with the look of it, was that, you know, that very primitive sense of image making.
So there's some wonderful comments here. Debbie Arlick says, Nancy, these images are filled with layered meaning. I applauded you for making a known subject completely original. Can you comment on the added color and etchings around shapes?
Yes. For me, you know how in memories, some are in black and white, some are in color, some have portions of each. And I think that's sort of what I wanted to mimic, was that that addition over time to memories, addition and reduction sometimes as well. So the blurring of this image was sort of the reduction, and then the adding on is trying to clarify again and find the image back in the reduction of the image.
So, and Krishna Malhotra said, beautiful capture and conveying of feeling. And Claudia Kunin said, love, what has left, what is left.
Oh, thank you.
So the writing is, you said, is done with your Wacom?
Yes. And it's just the Wacom tablet. It's the most, it's the most primitive, simple, basic Wacom thing you could ever have.
I'm amazed you were able to write with it. I find it very hard to write with that pen.
There was a definite learning curve. and it's very up and down. Sometimes it'll be very precise, and then all of a sudden you'll go back and keep thinking you're doing the exact same thing, and all of a sudden it's all just blurry and blotched, and you have to scrap it and start over again.
This one on the screen now is what reminded me of the tintype book.
And I would absolutely love to delve into those processes and then, you know, make digital negatives of some of the images and see how they translate to like even something like this that is very raw and graphic and almost forensic. It would be fun to see how that comes through in a very misty, murky chemistry.
I also love the repetition and how images recur in the series,
Mhm.
which is somewhat unusual.
Thank you. I think that's my love of cinema maybe coming through, is liking that feeling of repeated, images, like adding up like a flip book.
And we have one more comment here. Nanci, I love your manipulation of the images and the surreal quality of your work. Very intimate and full of so much love and emotion. What a tribute to your mother and your relationship.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
So great job, everyone.
Yeah, you guys
Bit
are
of a hiccup there, but
so inspirational. It's
Yeah.
such a pleasure to see all of your work. Really well done. And with that, I guess we're going to wrap it up for this open show number 44. We all had a really great time seeing all of you out there and enjoying beautiful, meaningful, wonderful work. And we hope that you can see it in your hearts to maybe donate some money to PPA. We need it so badly. We're all volunteer. None of us are paid. We're just doing this because we love photography. And so if you can see in your hearts to open up your wallets, that would be a wonderful thing. I think there's a link in the chat somewhere about how to donate, or there will be one.
Or you can buy prints, buy work.
Yeah, buy work. We all have photography for sale in our print shop, which is on the website, PasadenaPhotographyArts.org. So until next time, thank you guys so much. And here's to making images.
Great job,
thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for showing up.
See everyone.
And thank you, Pasadena.